Alright, I've been asked to do a video on checking clutch clearances. There's a couple ways that you can do it, and I hardly ever break this thing out because it's just such a pain to set up, and gotten to where you can pretty much judge what that clearance is when you're doing it, when you've been doing it so long. I can see checking it if you've never done one before and you're unsure of how much of clearance, what it looks like and what it feels like. So we got the gauge set up, and the real proper way to do it, especially when you got fluid on your clutches, is to apply air to it so it compresses everything. It sets the snap ring fully up against the position it's going to be when it compresses everything, because you can pop that snap ring in there, you can pull up on it and you think you have it seated, but you probably don't have it fully seated into where it's going to go. So the best way to do it is with air. Another problem that I run into is these benches have been beat on so much, there's not really a flat surface on these things anymore. So getting the drum to where it doesn't wobble around while you're trying to do all this stuff is really hard to do. But I have it set up. You can put that on a tooth of the clutch there. You can get it set out in such a way that it's going to stay on it and not pop off. So we got it set. We got pretty much set on 0. Some of these things can be pretty tricky where you're having to apply air. Like this one's got 2 feed holes, so I'm gonna have to block one of these holes while I'm blowing air into the other one for it to work properly. So this drum's gonna move a little bit when I go to try to put air to it. I've had it moving as much as about 5 or 6 to 10 thousandths. So just touching it has moved it. So we're pretty much on 0 right there. So we're moving about 45 thousandths. Pretty close to it. The other ways you can check it is get you some feeler gauges, and if you got the ones that are curved, that little curve down here on the edge, it can make things a little bit easier getting down into there. Now I went ahead and put these on there. I got 43 thousandths on here, and got in here, and it's just barely, it's just barely dragging on there. So we're pretty close to what that's reading. It is compressing it a little bit more. We might even be getting a little bit more than 45 thousandths out of that, but that's pretty much how you can check a drum. I have to get a unit together and show how to check rear clearance and front clearance, but there again, I hardly ever hook a dial gauge up to it because it's just such a pain to do, and I don't have all the attachments I really ought to have to try to hook these up to a unit. I can feel it by hand and know if I'm within specs or not, but we'll see if we can get something set up on a unit to check in clearance on it once it's fully assembled. Okay, sometimes you're gonna have to get real ingenious about how you hook your gauge up. This one I'm going to measure off of the forward drum. I'll measure the forward drum movement. That shaft is down inside of it. Got it bolted to the case here. And what I'm going to have to do is go in between here where the drums are and pry up on them. And I can't do this on camera because I ain't got nothing to hold the camera. But I did this already, and I'm at around 4 to 5 thousandths movement here, which is plenty good. So we're good here. What I'm going to do now is stack the rest of this up, and I'll put this input shaft on the overdrive drum, and then we'll measure the Endplay there. Okay, this time I got the gauge set up on there, and I went through the input speed sensor hole right up on the drum, and I ended up with 6 thousandths. So we're still really good. And like I say, just sometimes you're going to have to get ingenious about how you're hooking that stuff up. The better way, or not the better way, this is the better way. You check it with the gauge, but you should be able to get to where you can feel it by hand, and you can feel whether it's within specs or not. So that's what I normally do. And then if it feels out of spec, then I'll break this gauge out and see what I got. But mostly you're going to be going back in there and finding out where your Endplay problem is. Usually it comes out fine. And in case you was wondering about the dial gauge that I got, it's just a Central Forge dial indicator. Let's see if it's got a part number on here anywhere. It's nothing fancy, it's not expensive. 6410 and 6411. So I've had this thing forever. Been a good little set for me. I don't have a clue where I bought it from, or even how much I paid for it. It's been that long.